Hi, this is Ken Schaphorst. I'm going to talk today about a piece of mine entitled Descent. This is a piece I wrote quite a few years ago for a friend of mine, Dane Richardson, and I wrote it with Dave Liebman in mind. And the line that really inspired the piece, which I'll try to play for you, I'm at the piano now. I think that was inspired by Dave and by his, way of thinking about intervals. That really is the basis of the piece. I called it Descent because it sort of descends at the end, comes back where it started, but not a very imaginative title. But I liked the piece, and I arranged it years later, recorded it for big band in 2016. So I thought I'd talk through the creation of the melody. There are actually three phrases that follow that first phrase. And then I'll try to take you through the arranging process. So to begin with, I'll just talk a little bit about that phrase. It starts off on C. You can't see the piano, but I'll just say, and if I had to describe it, it's basically C mixolydian. I'm going to stop there on B flat. At that point, I've basically outlined all the notes in the C mixolydian scale, except for F. There's no F so far. C, D, E, C, D, B flat, G. The next note I play is an F sharp. So I guess if I had to describe the mode, I'll just play C in the bass there. It would be what we call a C Lydian dominant. So that would be, that's the F sharp. So that would be, it's a nice mode. I use it a lot, as do many other composers. But it shifts, and this is where I think I was thinking about Dave Liebman a little bit. As you can probably hear, there's a little pattern that develops after those four notes. Three notes go down, and then one up. Then that pattern continues, but every time I do it, I expand the intervals. So it's first minor third, major third, major third, major third, perfect fourth. So I just added, by the way, three more notes. There's a total of, I think, 15 notes in that first phrase. So again, the first four notes I think of as just kind of getting the motor started, and then this descending pattern. It's always a major third to start with. Then again, I do a minor third first, major third, perfect fourth. So every time I take that interval, minor third, major third, perfect fourth, and I expand it. And eventually it moves from C mixolydian, or I should say Lydian dominant. The last three notes actually outline a D flat major triad. That's F, D flat, A flat. So actually hear that moving away from C at that point to another chord. By the way, I was also thinking about Dave Liebman playing this on soprano. That is not a huge part of this arrangement, but I thought he would end on a low B flat, which is one of my favorite notes on the saxophone. I don't play it, but I know how that sounds. I know how Dave sounds when he plays a low B flat. So anyway, I wrote this phrase, and I liked it. I was playing it on piano, I'll just say. I often compose at the piano, not always, but this definitely felt comfortable at the piano. For the second phrase, again, maybe I'm not that proud of the title. Second phrase is basically the same. The only difference is instead of repeating the C twice at the end, I just hit it once and stop. So the first phrase, I'll try to play it again. Again, two C's at the end. Here's the second one. short. Again, nothing that profound there. Before I move on, I should talk about the ascending part of the melody. So after the descending part, I go just arpeggiating a C triad, E, G, C, F, B flat, E flat. So those are perfect fourths. And then I resolve to C. So that's sort of the answer to the opening descending phrase. Again, it ascends, gets us back to C. The other thing that's important, I guess, I wasn't sure what I would do harmonically at the beginning of that. And you'll hear in the arrangement, oftentimes I just avoid harmonizing it. But on the answer, at some point I started hearing this descending pattern of fifths in, as a pianist, I'll just say my left hand. So starting with C and G, B and F sharp, B flat and F. So together with a melody which ascends. I like that sound. Again, the contrary motion may be between the melody which ascends and the bass which descends. I thought would be nice. Gets us away from C. Of course, we can go back to C. So those are the first two phrases of my piece, Descent. And you'll hear it later, played much better than I do here at the piano. But I wanted to talk about the third phrase. That's where things get a little interesting. I start the same way. So now this time, instead of going back to C, the next phrase actually starts in D flat. So it's as if we took the end of that previous phrase and used that as a starting place. So my first note now is D flat instead of C. So I basically transposed the motive up a minor second. And I basically do the same thing. I don't go to the whole length of that first phrase, but now there's a little twist to that one. I would say, again, it's Lydian dominant over D flat. But instead of that, where that F sharp would shift to F natural in the first phrase, I stay on G in this case, which kind of creates a pivot where I can get back to C. So again, here's the third phrase, the first part, which you've heard now twice. That's the D flat part, starting on D flat. Again, there's the slight twist. I stay on G, which again pivots back to C. Now, here I start to fragment the melody, and this is something, I've learned from Beethoven and Thelonious Monk. But you take a little motive, and you can move that around, transpose it. Sometimes you can transpose it to fit chords. In this case, there are no chords, so I'm just kind of having fun. This is the kind of stuff I hear in like McCoy Tyner and Chick Corea, where maybe there's a pianistic aspect to this, but the first step is I transposed it down a major third. Again, that's a new thing. I took the first four notes of my motive, I moved it down a major third. Then I moved it up a perfect fourth, like a circle of fifths kind of thing. So now we've already been there, D flat, going back home in a way. But I took it one step further, and I then went up to G flat. So let me play all that. This is the third phrase. It's a long one. I hope I can remember it. So that's the first descent in C. That's the D flat part. We go back to C and we start this fragmenting. I added a couple notes there. So it's not just the first four notes in G flat, which is, by the way, a tritone away from where we started. But I went down, I guess what I think of is the so what chord. It's a G flat triad with then an A flat under it. And this sets me up, this probably took me a little while, by the way, to figure this out. but it sets me up for an E flat chord. So at this point, I'm pretty far from C, and I discovered that line would set up the same ending we heard in the first phrase, but up a minor third now. So that would be, think about this. So again, we heard that once before at the end of the first phrase. Now I've moved that up a minor third. Again, reminds me of, like, I guess Chick Corea has definitely been a model for me, certainly as a pianist. I don't play the piano very well, but I think when I hear those sounds, I think of his music, also McCoy Tyner for sure. So anyway, that's the piece. Maybe I'll stop now. I'll let you hear my orchestration of that, and then maybe I'll come back and talk about that a little bit. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the orchestration of this melody. I again wrote it for the soprano saxophone. I decided to keep the soprano in the saxophone section. So maybe I just heard that color. And so at the beginning I have it in octaves. Played by all the winds. Trumpets in the upper octave, trombones in the lower octave, saxophones split, piano and guitar also playing the line. So it's a pretty strong sound. Again, I don't really have to think about harmonization at this point. The first time we hear chords is at the cadence part of that melody. And I already talked about those chords a little bit. The one addition I'll just say is, and this turns out to be part of the piece later, I have these voicings in the trombones. The bass trombone is playing the chromatic part, but then in contrary motion, I have the other trombones playing this shape. It's C, G, D, going up a minor third over the B. So that's sort of like a B Lydian sound to a B flat. I mean, they're all sort of incomplete chords, but anyway, you'll hear later in the piece that gets developed. I like the way it kind of follows the melody up. Not exactly in the same intervals, but it fits. Anyway, that's the first melody. One little detail in that first statement, I have the brass play a forte piano on that. And then the saxophone's actually crescendo and decrescendo. Sometimes I like to do different things in different sections. So, and Matt Wilson, by the way, is playing drums in the recording. He solos over that like interval between the melodies, and I told him, and I always tell the drummers at this spot to play cymbals, and I think this comes from just the sustained nature of that sound. I hear sort of a sustained drumming sound, and then for the second phrase, again, it's the same thing. The only difference is it's short, so I usually tell the drummers to play drums. This is typical in jazz composition. You have these ideas. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes players want to do it, sometimes they don't. I think you'll hear some of that in Matt's playing. The third phrase, again, which is the more complicated one, starts in unison. And when we get to the D flat part, I don't know if you remember that. So that's the first part of the third phrase. So this is the one that's D flat, sort of D flat Lydian dominant. I actually put that over B. So instead of, I guess, acknowledging the D flat nature of that melody, I decided to develop that idea of sort of a B Lydian, which again we've heard in that voicing. It's sort of that sound. The note that's kind of the oddball note is that G. It doesn't fit into the Lydian, but that gets it back to C, and then I have this little harmonic progression there where I go, I'll just talk it through: C, kind of F minor, then I go to the B again, and then I go to E. Again, these are all voiced out in the trombones, I would say, pretty consistently, and then there's a little bit of voicing the saxophone section. For the most part, the trumpets are in unison, with the exception, I think, of the final chords of each phrase. And then it goes to the E flat, which I mentioned earlier. That final chord is another case where the saxophones and the brass depart. I have the saxophones crescendo into the beginning of the piano solo, as opposed to the brass, which just cuts out. So I'd like to talk about the piano solo, and maybe I'll combine discussion of the solo itself with the orchestration. So it starts off in C minor. So this is a little bit different than the first, Mixolydian. And I guess this is partly because we're coming out of E flat. I thought that might be a more graceful segue. But the other thing is I have this idea in this piece of taking that melody and expanding and contracting the intervals. So this is something I've learned from Bartók, I think was the first composer I'd heard who did this. But I've done it myself. I'm not the only one who does this, but I decided instead of basically mapping that shape onto the Lydian dominant, I would map it onto the C minor pentatonic. And that would make it, instead of... I think I did that right. Sometimes I make mistakes. And I decided to give it to the bass. And like I was talking to you earlier about in the case of the drums, I write this out and I give the bass player a chord symbol. I'd say most bass players don't really use this as a sort of line they have to play, but I'm actually kind of proud of it, so I'm going to play it for you. It's... So it's, again, the same melody, but in the bass register, it's in quarter notes now instead of eighth notes. So you might not even notice it, but it's the same. What I wrote was the same shape, and I grouped it in sort of asymmetric numbers of notes. So that it's first 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me see. No, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 9 to fill out the 4-bar phrase. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then it loops. So when we get to the so that's C minor, and it's an AABA form, kind of simple form. It's based loosely on the melody, as I'll discuss in a minute, but the melody, as you probably noticed, doesn't really follow that pattern. So the piano solos over that sort of C minor. I hear it very free, like again, McCoy Tyner or something like that on Passion Dance. I guess that's kind of my model in some ways. And then I heard it going to E flat, and this is because I guess my melody ends on E flat. So again, I thought that would be a good thing to pick up in the solo form, and I decided to change the mode to Mixolydian. So again, make it a little different, to go from a sort of C minor pentatonic to an E flat Mixolydian. And then I changed the bass line, by the way, back to the original. So instead of C minor, I go. Again, that's the original melody now transposed to E flat as a bass line. And again, not every bass player plays it, but it gives, if they do even a little bit, it gives it a sense of coherence, I think. So Ori Kane plays a great solo. By the way, you're going to hear that in a minute. And then I think he takes two choruses, and then I bring in some, I call them interruptions. So this is something I like to do. I'm not sure soloists always like it, I have to admit. So I would be cautious as a composer, but so often we hear backgrounds, and that's great. And I do a lot of backgrounds myself. In the second solo, I bring in backgrounds, a lot of them, maybe too many. But in this case, and this is something I've done, I think I heard this in like Count Basie recordings. You know, backgrounds for a piano solo I think are always problematic. But I noticed sometimes he would take a solo, this is Count Basie, and then the band would play. They basically trade, like 4 bars a band, Count Basie plays. Check out The Kid from Red Bank, by the way, if you don't know that arrangement. Great playing. Some of the greatest, I think, playing by Count Basie. So I decided to interrupt him for 4 bars and then let Ori play another 4. And that happens over the first 2 A sections. And what I did as this sort of interruption is I took that that kind of shape, and I guess from the very beginning I noticed that kind of implies a grouping of 7/8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, palm. So I decided to play with that a little bit and actually sort of suggest that we're actually in 7/8. And I took the comping pattern, by the way, that the trombones were playing. You remember that? And I put that in the trumpets up the octave, kind of voiced it out. And I did this. I'll just play it for you and then I'll talk about it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, it's faster in the piece, but just to slow it down. But I don't change the meter. I put it in 4, and this is always a little confusing for people when they play this piece for the first time. But it's bum 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 bum. It's, you know, this is always the case with polyrhythms. You know, when they're in a meter like 4, it doesn't quite line up, so you have to fill in the blanks somehow. At the end of that, after doing it 4 times, I have 2 extra beats. So I go. That's once. And then I fill that in. So you'll hear that twice. And by the way, I cut out the drums. This is another thing that sometimes drummers don't like because they're like grooving. And but I thought it'd be dramatic just to take the drums out. The bridge, when we get there, I have a development of the melody. This time again it's transposed to E flat because we're at the bridge of the form. And I often do this where, I love the pedal in the piano. I'm often trying to do that orchestrationally. So trumpets are playing it, and I bring them in one by one, playing 8th notes. And then at the same time, I have the other wind instruments kind of sustaining notes in that figure. So by the end, you get this sort of cluster, and then it crescendos. The other thing, I think this is the first time in the big band arrangement I brought in Jerry Leak, who's one of my favorite percussionists, and he starts playing the shaker. I felt like, because it's 8 bars, by the way, the trading at this point is basically 8 bars of this sort of E flat Mixolydian. Going back to C minor, I wanted to give Ori 8 more bars to play at the end of the solo. So I thought to take out the drums, because there's so much happening here, I needed something to kind of lock everybody in. So I decided to use the shaker, which you'll hear. All right, so that's basically orchestration of the melody and the piano solo. So I'll let you hear this. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is what happens after the piano solo, which I would describe as a soli. Sometimes we have sax solis. In this case, it's a soli for the whole band. And I've taken the original motive and I've developed it. However, I would describe it as slightly more improvisational, maybe more stream of consciousness-like, which is in keeping with the soli tradition. It starts with the same 6 notes as my original motive, but I take those last 2 motives, or rather 2 notes, as a motive, and I loop that, or sort of sequence it, repeating it every 3 beats. So let me see if I can tap out the rhythm and play my line. So it's... So in other words, you know, there's a little syncopation going on, something we've been doing since ragtime. It's basically in the C Mixolydian mode. In fact, there is an F natural there, but at the end I bring in the F sharp, so maybe it's a little bit of both. Then in the second 8-bar phrase, by the way, these are, I guess, 4 8-bar phrases in the soli. They're all sort of around C, but I wasn't really thinking about harmony as much. I came up with this line first and then orchestrated it. This one, however, does have some harmony that I added later. The first chord you'll hear is a C sus chord, then it goes down to B flat and A flat sus. Again, after the first 4 notes, I pick up on that motive, but sequence it, trying to imply 3/4, or maybe you could even hear it as 6/8. So both of those first 2 phrases follow the sort of contour of the descending motive. I thought maybe for the 3rd phrase I'd try to counter that with an ascending line. And what I decided to do was to invert the melody. So this is something I do a lot. When I come up with a line I like, I turn it upside down. So I've taken that first 6 notes and inverted it to... I actually started on B flat instead of C. In fact, I'm starting with the same exact chord that I left off at the end of the 2nd phrase. And let me see if I can play this slowly. This is going to be hard. it gets harder and faster. But starts soft, which I didn't really do, and builds as it ascends. And that's the third 8-bar phrase. I'll say one more thing about that. It's basically a whole tone scale. Actually, I can play the whole line for you so you can hear that. Sorry, it starts on B flat, not C. So again, that's all C whole tone. But I mix it with those sus chords, which are much more richly voiced. By the way, that's all in the rhythm section. The harmony that is, those sustained chords. I mix the two, the whole tone and the more diatonic harmony, which I think gives it a lot more richness and a lot more interest, at least to my ears. I'll say one more thing before we go into the fourth phrase. A lot of this is orchestrated in sort of a typical soli fashion, which means I think I have 2 trumpets and the soprano initially playing the melody. I think I have 2 trumpets and the alto on the second, and then maybe 3 trombones, tenors, bari, doubling them. So you've got basically 5 voices moving up and down together. A lot of pentatonic voicings. I don't know if I can do that very well. I'm going to try. So in other words, those are all sort of C pentatonic sounds, and then shifts to B flat. So that goes by very quickly, but that's kind of the sound world of this, at least at the beginning of the soli. In the fourth phrase, it again picks up on that whole tone. By this time we're back to C, we're back to our original motive. The thing I do here is I imply 7/8 again. Again, we've been doing this off and on from the beginning of the piece, but I take my motive, maybe I'll tap out the rhythm again so you can hear the two together. Kind of goofed at the end there, but you'll hear it played much better later. Anyway, that's another development of that motive. And then for the last 4 bars, right before the interlude, which, by the way, shifts to 7/4, I'll talk about that in a minute, I take that original 5-note motive and I sequence it down in whole steps. And I also sustain a lot of that and crescendo leading into the 7/4. So that's the final and fourth phrase of that soli section. Like I said, it goes into 7/4. So this is something that I think has been brewing in the piece for some time now. I thought we should just let that go now. So I take that pattern that I think I played earlier. We heard that interrupting Ori Kane's solo. We heard it as a sort of a background or an accompaniment to the melody at the beginning. At this point, it's in 7/4. It's actually a 7/4 bar kind of divided in half, almost into 2 7/8 chunks. I also have a saxophone melody, which is superimposed over that, which is that same rhythm, but 4 8th notes later. It's 1, bum bum ba da ba, bum bum ba da bum, bum bum ba da bum, bum bum ba da ba ba da, which I like to do. Basically, take the same idea and kind of displace them, which creates a little groove. So that happens, and it creates a kind of transition into the trumpet solo, which I'd like to talk about. This is the second of the 2 solos, and I was trying to think of a way to kind of relax, even though those 4 bars of 7/4, it's maybe a kind of mini climax in the piece. It gets even crazier at the end, as we'll hear. But up till that point, I would say that might be the most intense moment. But once the trumpet solo starts, it really relaxes. It relaxes. It turns into 7/2, actually. So I changed the meter from 7/4 to 7/2 because I wanted to feel the half notes instead of the quarter notes. That was very important. And when I conduct in halves. Let's see, what else can I say about this? The piano is playing our melody, but with the pedal down. So it sounds like this. what's going on during the trumpet solo is I'm mixing the two modes together. I talked about the minor pentatonic in the bass and how that creates the sort of foundation for the piano solo. I'll talk about that later, but in the left hand you'll hear 2, 3, 4. Again, that's the slow 7. It's a minor chord that I'm playing there. E flat, B flat, and F. So I'm doing that against the mixolydian in my right hand. And Ori Kane is playing that. Brad Shepik, who's playing guitar, is playing a C minor pentatonic pattern that goes which is basically the slowed down bass line that we heard under the piano solo. Instead of boom, 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 boom. Again, that was that 7 plus 9. Now it's in 7, but it's in half notes, and he's playing them in fourths, parallel fourths. So I'm not going to try to play those two things together. That's going to be too challenging for me. But you'll hear it, and that creates interesting kind of polymodal fabric that Ralph Alessi solos over on trumpet. The drums are, I think I asked Matt to keep his hi-hat going just to keep us anchored, but he's not playing time. You know, that's another thing that helps this sort of relax and create a very, think of it as sort of a dreamy state. And then that goes on for one chorus. So we actually go through the same C, C, E flat, C, A, B, A pattern. Now, by the way, since we're in 7/2, it's actually 4 bars of 7/2. That makes up the first A section. 4 bars of 7/2 makes up the second. Then we transpose. And by the way, the bass line, or rather, I should say, it's not a bass line at this point, but the piano part moves up to E flat at that point. So you'll hear that. C, C, E flat, C. For the second chorus, we add the trombones. I bring them in, playing some chords, and I use the plunger. It creates a sort of a bluesy effect. And then in the third chorus, final chorus of Ralph's solo, I bring in the woodwinds, playing the piano part. At this point, Ori stops playing that, but it's but I actually orchestrate that or harmonize it, I would say, which creates a lot of tension when you add, you know, the trombones again playing. I should have said pentatonic harmonies. They're playing these kind of chords over again the C, E flat motion, and while that's going on, the woodwinds are playing a more diatonic melody. So that's creating, I would say, again, this conflict that we talked about earlier. It was initially played in the piano and guitar. Now it's between the woodwinds and the trombones. And that builds a lot. Again, I feel a little bit for Ralph Alessi, you know, first of all, competing against these different modes, but then, you know, quite a busy set of backgrounds that develop. Okay, so I'll let you listen to that, and then we'll come back and talk more. So now I'd like to talk about the rest of the piece. As we discussed, the trumpet solo builds from this sort of dreamy 7/2 into a more intense groove. I forgot to mention this the first time, but the tabla comes in the second chorus. Jerry Leek, in addition to playing shaker and many things in this piece, plays tabla at this point, which contributes to the groove. And I forget if I mentioned this also, but the trombones develop this minor pentatonic comping pattern with the plungers, but that increases in rhythmic intensity as it builds. Of course, we have the saxophones. All these things combine to create this big crescendo, which gets released in the shout chorus, which is kind of the climax of the piece. The shout chorus is constructed over this groove that we've heard a few times now. It's something we heard, well, we've heard many times now. Hopefully we're not sick of it yet. But it's a 7/4 pattern. It's written in 7/4, but it's actually a 7/8 pattern, which again is played twice in every measure. And I had Jerry Leek play a 2/4 like mambo bell pattern. I guess I'm always trying to mix the 7 and the 4, or the 2. Maybe that was too much, I have to say. It was hard to get all that locked up, as you can probably hear in the performance, particularly when Matt Wilson's soloing over it. But that's what's going on. And I've written 4 phrases again. In this case, they're 4 bars of 7/4. And it's basically a 2-bar phrase that I've written, orchestrated, followed by Matt playing a 2-bar solo. So that's sort of the third solo, back and forth, band and Matt. Again, it's a little bit like the soli, the first soli, except the groove is more intense as opposed to the first soli, where the drums were really just playing, almost soloing around the figures. The rhythm section would occasionally play a chord. In this case, they are grooving, playing this pattern that I just played. And the other big difference is that the winds are voiced much higher, much stronger. The rhythm section is playing stronger as well. But I would say there's a lot of lines in the lead trumpet that are starting on high C, or sort of moving up in that direction. We don't have anything like that in the first soli. So again, it's a little bit similar in terms of the line writing. I was trying to develop the motives. Let's see if I can think about some of the things. One thing I did is I took that minor third pattern that we heard, and just went with it and kind of started stacking fourths more than we did the first time. That's one of the phrases. The first phrase is kind of a bebop-y, I mean, a lot of these things I think of just as something I might play if I could. Anyway, the whole shout chorus as a whole is a series of these phrases in which we're trading with Matt. And then after we do that 4 times back and forth, I've written a little interlude. I guess it serves a little bit like the bridge, except the harmonies are a little different. And saxophones playing with it's a different kind of groove as well, almost like a samba. And Ori Kane is filling in a little bit. And then we play the final melody one more time. So this is where we shift, by the way. If I haven't said this, we're in 7/4 at this point. This is after the 7/2, which gradually, intensifies, and we get back to the 7/4, almost like we did right before the trumpet solo begins. At the very end, I go back to 4, and I play the melody one more time. Kind of end with a big, slightly delayed C this time. The other thing that I did there is I asked Tony Cadleck, who's playing lead, if he could play it up the octave, and he did. That's kind of amazing. I've been playing trumpet my whole life. I will never be able to play anything like that. And the amazing thing about Tony is he played it perfectly every time. We did several takes of this, and I don't think he ever missed it. So that's an amazing feat. So I was happy. I often write those things as optional, not knowing who's going to play lead trumpet, but I should have known he would do it. So that's the piece, Descent. I hope you've enjoyed my trying to talk you through it, and you can hear it on the recording, How to Say Goodbye, which I released again in 2016. And I'm sure you can find it online. It's on Amazon, places like that sell CDs. So I've enjoyed sharing some of these insights. I hope this is helpful. Thanks. Bye.